and it did Peter a bad service. It dried up any trickle of pity in him that may have remained in the pirate's infuriated breast. The first thing he did on finding himself alone in the fast-falling night was to tiptoe to Slightly's tree and make sure that it provided him with a passage. Then, for long, he remained brooding, his hat of ill omen on the sward, so that a gentle breeze which had arisen might have played refreshingly through his hair. Dark as were his thoughts, his blue eyes were as soft as periwinkle. Intently he listened for any sound from the netherworld, but all was as silent below as above. The house under the ground seemed to be but one more empty tenement in the void. Was that boy asleep? Or did he stand waiting at the foot of Slightly's tree with his dagger in his hand? There was no way of knowing, save by going down. Hook let his cloak slip softly to the ground, and then biting his lips till the lewd blood stood on them, he stepped into the tree. He was a brave man, but for a moment he had to stop there and wipe his brow, which was dripping like a candle. Then silently he let himself go into the unknown. He arrived, unhurt, at the foot of the shaft, and still stood again, biting his breath, which had almost left him. As his eyes became accustomed to the dim light, various objects in the home under the trees took shape. But the only one on which his greedy gaze rested, long sought for and found at last, was the great bed, and on the bed lay Peter, fast asleep. Unaware of the tragedy being enacted above, Peter continued for a little time after the children left to play gaily on his pipes. No doubt, rather a forlorn attempt to prove himself that he did not care. Then he decided not to take his medicine, so as to grieve Wendy. Then he lay down on the bed outside the coverlet to vex her still more, for she had always tucked them inside it, because you never know if you may not grow chilly in the night. Then he nearly cried, but it struck him how indignant she would be if he laughed instead, so he laughed a hearty laugh and fell asleep in the middle of it. Sometimes, though not often, he had dreams, and they were more painful than the dreams of other boys. For hours he could not be separated from these dreams, though he wailed piteously in them. They had to do, I think, with the riddle of his existence. At such times it had been Wendy's custom to take him out of bed and sit with him on her lap, soothing him in dear ways of her own invention, and when he grew calmer, to put him back in bed before he quite woke up, so that he should not know of the indignity to which she had subjected him. But on this occasion he had fallen at once into a dreamless sleep. One arm dropped over the edge of the bed, one leg was arched, and the unfinished part of his laugh was stranded on his mouth, which was open, showing the little pearls, his little baby teeth. So he would have nightmares and be upset, and Wendy would take care of him, and she put him back so he wouldn't know that she had to rock him back to sleep. Or like he was kind of half asleep. Thus defenseless, Hook found him. He stood at the foot of the tree, looking across the chamber at his enemy. Did no feelings of compassion stir his somber breast. The man was not wholly evil. He loved flowers, I've been told, and sweet music. He was no mean performer on the harpsichord. And let it be frankly admitted, the idyllic nature of the scene shook him profoundly. Mastered by his better self, he would have returned reluctantly up the tree, but for one thing. What stayed him was Peter's impertinent appearance as he slept. The open mouth, the drooping arm, the arched knee, they were such a personification of cockiness as, taken all together, will never again, one may hope, be presented to eyes so sensitive to their offensiveness. They steeled Hook's heart. If his rage had broken him into 100 pieces, every one of them would have disregarded the incident and let the sleeper. So, basically, he wouldn't have cared because, Peter looked kind of nice and peaceful and all that if he had a little bit of sympathy, and he was fine. But then he saw that look on Peter's face and he was just like, it's like when your parent gets mad if you roll your eyes or something, which, you should not do. But it just, makes him even madder because you're being so disrespectful. It's like that. He's just like, ugh! Because he's this little smarty pants that drives him crazy. So, what was that? Though a light and one of the dark lamps shone dimly on the bed. Not a dark lamp. Lamp shone dimly on the bed. Hook stood in the darkness himself. And at the first stealthy step forward, he discovered an obstacle. The door of Slightly's tree. It did not entirely fill the aperture, and he had been looking over it. Feeling for the catch, he found to his fury that it was low down beyond his reach. And to his disordered brain, it seemed that an irritating quality in Peter's face and figure visibly increased. So he's irritated because he can't get the door open now. He rattled the door and flung himself against it. Was his enemy to escape him after all? The red in his eye had caught sight of Peter's medicine, standing on a ledge within easy reach. He fathomed what it was straight away, and immediately he knew that the sleeper was in his power. Lest he should be taken alive, Hook always carried about his person a dreadful drug, blended by himself of all the death-dealing rings that had come into his possession. So they would hold poison in their rings a long time ago, so they could sneak it, and the rings would actually open, and they'd shake the poison into their drinks. These he had boiled down into a yellow liquid quite unknown to science, which was probably the most virulent poison in existence. So all the rings he had captured, he got all the poisons together and mixed them together and cooked them together. It's just like the worst poison you could ever have. 5 drops of this he now added to Peter's cup. His hand shook, but it was in exultation rather than in shame. As he did it, he avoided glancing at the sleeper, but not lest pity should unnerve him, merely to avoid spilling. Why would that avoid spilling? Because he'd see how much Peter annoyed him, and he might get upset and spill it. Then one long, gloating look he cast upon the victim, and turning, he wormed his way with difficulty up the tree. Kind of funny. As he emerged to the top, he looked the very spirit of evil breaking from its hole, like brrr. Donning his hat at its most rakish angle, he wound his cloak around him, holding one end in front, as if to conceal his person from the night, of which it was the blackest part, and muttering strangely to himself, stole away through the trees. What is going to happen to Peter Pan? Will he take the medicine? Will he not? What's